Well, good morning. Ersten, ich spreche kein Deutsch. Kein, zero, absolut gar nicht, nothing. So I'm sorry. Thank you. I hope that works. To begin, they are kind enough to let me speak twice. I think that was very nice. I speak tomorrow, too. So today, I would like to just sort of give a history of censorship in the U.S. and how we got to where we are today. And actually, today, things are pretty good in the United States, but it wasn't always so, and there's still big challenges, and there are still films that cannot be shown for various reasons. I will show you the most famous film that could not be shown in the U.S., the most famous case, some time ago, Titicaca Follies. It was a documentary made by Fred Weisman. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that documentary, but it was a wonderful film. He was like a fly on the wall going into this mental hospital in Massachusetts and living with the patients and their caretakers for many, many months, captured a lot of footage of how these patients were treated in this mental hospital. And he showed in order to do that, of course, he had the permission of the head guy at this hospital. And not only did he have permission to shoot there, but since the patients could not give good permission themselves, because they're insane, he gave permission as the custodian of these patients for all this filming to be done. Everything's taken care of. Fred Weisman had it covered. He shows the film after he finishes it to the staff of the hospital. They loved it. It showed exactly the work they do. It showed the challenges they had. They thought this was the best thing since white bread. They just loved it. And then they went and showed it out in the public. They had a big premiere in Boston, and they invited all the city politicians and the state politicians and the society people, and they all came on this opening night, and they were horrified. They were shocked. This is how we treat patients? And so they got the Attorney General of the state of Massachusetts to figure out how they could stop it. And they couldn't stop it on copyright. They weren't sure what they could do about personal rights. And finally, they decided that the head of the hospital was the custodian of the patients for purposes of care, but not for purposes of giving permission. And so the Attorney General of the state of Massachusetts appointed himself the person in charge of the legal rights of these patients, and he brought a lawsuit and got an injunction, and for 35 years this film could not be shown until all the patients were dead that are shown in the film. And once that happened, now the film is available. I'm not going to show you the whole film, but I will show you one clip that will help you understand why the film was not appreciated by the general public as much as it was appreciated by the staff at the hospital. And there is one thing I will tell you ahead of time, because you might not catch it. It shows a film, the segment I'm showing, is of a patient being taken for his daily shave. And they're giving the patient a hard time, and he gives them a hard time back. And as they turn a corner, you can kind of see it, the guard slaps him. And you hear it. He slaps him so hard that the patient begins to bleed from the mouth. And you'll see it later that they actually are daubing the blood off. And I'll tell you ahead of time, because on first viewing you might not pick that up, but that'll help you understand why they wanted to suppress the film. Can you, Mr. Expert, I got help here. That's not it. sound. Need sound.
I'll come in. The goddamn thing isn't dirty, is it? What? What'd you say? Good. What'd you say, Jim?
Say anything.
Huh? I didn't say anything. Speak up, man. I can't hear you. What'd you say? Come on.
I know.
Come on, Jim. Come on, let's go wash up. You get shaved. How's that room, Jim?
Quite fine.
What?
Quite clean.
How come you put, what'd you say? How's that room? Huh? How's that room, Jim? Answer me.
I put that room clean, Jim?
Yes, sir.
What?
How come you got it all dirty last night? Hmm?
Cola last, listen. Cola and white yesterday now, wasn't that?
What'd you say, Jim?
Little cola.
Huh? What?
What'd you say, Jim?
How's that room gonna be tomorrow, Jim? How's that room gonna be tomorrow, Jim?
Hey, how's the room gonna be?
Very neat, very clean.
How come it's not clean today? You told me that yesterday. What happened? Hmm? How come you rip all your clothes up?
How's that room, Jim?
Very clean. It's
Huh?
clean, I keep it.
What'd you say? Answer me, Jim. Time up. Who's that? These pictures might be on the way.
Okay. So you can see why they reacted, but I love this story because of the way the hospital loved the film, and it wasn't until it got out they decided it had to be suppressed. Of course, it isn't just censorship that stops us from seeing films, and it's also some films can't be seen just because they get very old. And I did want to show one example of that. I know we're carrying coals to Newcastle on this one, but I would like to show that this isn't it. No, this is a baby face. Oh, sorry. That's a start of a. That's all right. That's just. This, by the way, is the what we call the Packard campus in the U.S. It was about $150 million structure just to preserve film. It's really quite marvelous. I don't know, Rainer, if you've been over there yet, but it's
really amazing to
facility.
pick up a roll of film. And just to see this and realize the age of this film and all the people who went into making it, and just to look at the images on it. All these people who worked on these things who are all gone now, but they've left behind these amazing shadows for us to enjoy. Probably the most amazing and unique thing about the Packard campus is that it is part of the Library of Congress, which means it's part of the federal government. We are fortunate in that we get a part of a budget from Congress every year, and part of that budget, and a fairly good-sized chunk, goes to preservation. Many of our early films, and actually some more recent ones, are lost forever. I mean, there's nothing left. I know one Academy Award-winning film is called The Patriot. Emil Jannings got his Best Actor Oscar for that one, and nothing survives on it. And it's this major, huge production was done by Paramount, you know, a very multi-million-dollar budget and everything, and all that survives on it are a few trailers and stills. The other reason a lot of them don't survive, of course, is just because the studios didn't really care about them. They were just product, and once they were done and made their money, they went on the shelf. They might keep them because they still own the rights to them, keep them to remake them later on. But we know of some studios that very deliberately destroyed material. One studio destroyed all their silent negatives in the 40s because they didn't think anyone was ever going to want to see them again.
Right, so that's one of your guys whose film was just lost because it wasn't taken care of very well. But that's a whole different speech. I just wanted to speak because sometimes we think the only way films aren't seen is because of censorship. Well, in this era where we saw this, there was no national censorship in the United States, but there was censorship. And it was very rough because it was regional. It was cities, each city. And they're, you know, big country. There are a lot of cities. You know, the joke was that the toughest city was Boston, so we always used to say banned in Boston. But these actual individual cities, so you can imagine what the studios went crazy about it. Want to show you a film, a clip of a film that was shown or not shown in New York City. It was Babyface, and this is fun because it shows you what the film was like after it was censored and cut, and then side by side what was cut out of it, at least a part. There was over 5 minutes cut out. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's kind of fun to watch that. The film is Babyface. You know, each area has sensitivity to different things. I noticed when the film was shown earlier of the German troops, I was over there laughing like crazy, and nobody else in the room was laughing. Everyone has different kind of sensitivities, and New York City was very sensitive about mobsters, so and morals and things like that. So this is the film called Babyface. This was in both versions. No, I'm sorry. This was the part of what was cut out.
Almost always, the things that people wanted to cut out of movies were ideas. And so you have ideas being cut out of the original Babyface.
This was cut out of
New York
Babyface.
censors.
That man of mine.
Babyface was really interesting because I'd known the film for a long time, and actually I had a copy of it on Laserdisc, for those who remember what Laserdiscs were. They asked me to go and check the negative to see how what condition was in, and that's when I noticed that we actually had 2 negatives. So I get them out, and I start looking at the 2 real ones, and I notice that there's something strange about them.
By the way, these were still taken at the Packard campus that I
table
told you about,
and
that
set one on
beautiful
top of the
structure
other
just
one,
for the
and that's when I
preservation of
noticed that,
film.
you know, like the one real one was this big, and the other real one was like this big. And I'm like, there's something going on here.
Say, I like it here. How about a job?
Well, we don't.
Oh, now, don't tell me in this great big building there ain't someplace for me.
Have you had any experience?
Plenty.
And I started going through the 2 negatives and also listening to the soundtracks and began finding these differences, these great differences between the 2 films.
And then he has the eureka moment. And he realizes that what he has is the film before it was edited.
The boss won't be back for an hour.
Well, then why don't we go in and talk this over?
That's where the scene stopped in the censored version. This was the cut part.
The original negative was cut to the censorship version. The duplicate negative.
So censorship was on a city-by-city basis at that time, and the film industry, the big studios, just they couldn't deal with this. It meant they had to have lobbyists in every city in the country. So they came up with something called the Hayes Office, and that was then replaced by our rating systems. And you could see, it was very interesting to me in Chris's presentation, that chart he showed of how our rating system works versus other rating systems, and it was very stark to me because we have often argued that our rating system goes very easy on violence and very hard on sex. And when you saw it projected up here, you could see that that was true, that they made it very strict for sexual content. But violence, you kill somebody, you rape somebody, that's okay. But if there's sex involved, even healthy love, you know, don't show those people in love expressing themselves sexually. So our system is very skewed that way. Then we had some, and that actually worked in one sense. It worked in the sense that all these censorship boards around the country went away. First of all, it's expensive to censor a film, and if the studios didn't like it, then they'd take you to court. It turned out to be very cumbersome, more cumbersome than most cities wanted or could afford to use. So the rating system stayed in place and worked in that way. It is very discriminatory in favor of studio films because the system's run by the studios, and it discriminates against independent films, but of course, if the studio is running the system, they don't care if it discriminates against independent films, but it's still on some level kind of worked. But then a few things happened. 1978, we changed our copyright law to bring it in conformance with Europe so that automatic copyright attached to anything that was created. But a more important thing that happened was consolidation of media groups. We see it happening all over the world, but it was very extraordinary in America where media companies got bought up, and these studios that used to make movies all of a sudden were part of a big company, and then all of a sudden that was part of an even bigger company. It was part of an even bigger company. And the folks at the top, they didn't care how good your film was. They want to know how good your profit was. And there was this always pressure on profit. So in the 60s and 70s, the film licensing costs and the music licensing costs were pretty much like they are in Europe. And we're going over that yesterday with Muriel, who will be speaking later. And the prices were kind of similar. And then the consolidation took place. And all the big bosses wanted to know is, how much money did you make this year? And they were looking for money everywhere. And they found that they could raise the rates a little bit. Wouldn't make much difference. And they raised them a little more. Wouldn't make much difference. And they raised them a little more, and the independent film people said, ouch. But studios didn't care. They raised the prices some more until we got to the late 80s, early 90s, and the prices being asked for 30 seconds of just a normal film would be $5,000 to $10,000. That's a lot. And the same with music. To license a minute of a music, $12,000 was not uncommon. And if it was a hit, if it was a big song, you know, $25,000 are prices I've seen. So the independent film people especially were squeezed and squeezed. Then a marvelous thing happened. And it started with documentary filmmakers. So that's what mostly we'll be talking about today, although it's now spread. Documentary filmmakers got together, and this was under the leadership of the American University, and they said, look, we ought to be able to use some of this material for free, and they were aware we have what we call fair use. You call it the right of quotation. In England, it's called the right of fair dealing. In some places, it's called the right of incidental use. But whatever it's called, all copyright law has in it some provision for using somebody else's stuff to make your stuff. all that concept, whether you call it freedom of expression, whatever you call it, that's provided in every copyright law in the world in different ways. So across America, we had 6 meetings of documentary filmmakers and sat them down and said, what is it that you think should trigger your right to use other people's stuff in your documentary films? And they came up with something called the Statement of Best Practices in Documentary Filmmaking. And I reprinted it. There's a handout, and it's in your materials. You'll see it. They even made a color cover of it. It's really impressive. And you'll see it there. And it was published. We took part of it. The meetings in Los Angeles were in my law office, and I wasn't so sure that. In fact, I was quite sure it would not have the impact that it ultimately had. But they came up with 4 situations. The more we talked to them, and we distilled out what those 4 were. Situation number 1 is if you use some material to actually comment on the material or to criticize it. And that's true in almost all countries. That if you want to say, well, Michael Donaldson's book is really lousy, it's badly written, you almost have to pull out a little bit as an example. And that's true pretty well everywhere. And that was the first and easiest one to nail down. When you're criticizing a work, you can use a lot of it. The second one was if you're quoting a work in order to not to comment on the work, but to comment on society somehow, comment on something that's going on in society. That's the second way that you ought to be able to use somebody else's stuff in your documentary. And the third one, they were very, very strong about, and that's when you capture something, you're making your documentary, and you capture other copyrighted material, even though that isn't your intent particularly, you don't mean to do it particularly, but it happens. And particularly the thing that had stopped many documentaries was music, where they would go follow somebody down a street, and there'd be a street musician. And, you didn't stop and ask him what the heck he was playing or who wrote it, and so you couldn't get distribution on the film because you couldn't get a license for this music that was playing in the background. A big, big problem. And number 4, using copyrighted material in a historical context, because often, you can't go back and film the sinking of the Titanic today. You have to use archival footage of some kind if you want to do a historical documentary. So I want to go through and show examples of that, and we'll start with the first one. And this is kind of fun. I'll have, or we think, if our systems are working right, we'll have some more examples tomorrow. But this is not a film clip, although it was in a television show. This is a song, and it's a Disney song, which you may recognize. And the filmmakers, it's a show on television in America called Family Guy, and they were making fun of Walt Disney. Walt Disney. There's a lot of evidence, a lot of books published that allege that Walt Disney was anti-Semitic, and this is a song from Family Guy that uses a lot of a Disney-owned song. I just hit this.
Very own. Nothing else has worked so far, so I'll wish upon a star, wondrous dancing speck of light. I need a Jew. Lois makes me take the rap, 'cause our checkbook looks like crap. Since I can't give her a slap, I need a Jew. Where to find a Baum or Steen or Stein to teach me how to whine and do my taxes?
I think you get the idea of the song. And that one, of course, Disney sued on. They were not happy at all about that. Can't figure that out. And the court didn't have any problem finding that this was a direct criticism of Walt Disney, and so this song they owned could be used substantially. And that was easy for them. This next one is an example of a clip where they're using copyrighted material to illustrate an argument or point that they're making about society. So it's on the DVD, yeah. Okay. And it'll be GMA. I like it when it takes him a minute or two, because it would take me about 5. Okay, yeah. Number 6 there. All right. Yeah, this is the clip. A very good example of what we're talking about.
Look at Contact and how the movies have portrayed alien life over the years.
Here's where we come in, Joan. Jodie Foster is meeting with the Presidential Commission. We've already made contact with the civilization in the star system Vega, 27 light years away. We've been sent blueprints for a huge machine. The question is, do we build it? And the answers are everything Hollywood has taught us about life on other worlds.
It is our belief that the message contains instructions for building something, some kind of machine. It might be some type of advanced communication device, or it could be a teaching machine of some kind.
Could be a Trojan horse. We build it and outpours the entire Vegan army.
And that's the entire history of aliens on film. Good aliens who come to Earth bringing peace and knowledge.
We have come to visit you in peace.
Bad aliens who come to Earth for lunch. From Georges Méliès, A Trip to the Moon, 1902. Filmmakers and film goers have been fascinated with life on other worlds. But big or small, cute or icky, alien life is portrayed in pop culture inevitably shares some human-like traits.
The creature here, you notice, is very unhuman-like. However, it has eyes, it has a mouth, it even has a tongue, which again is another example, I think, of our lack of creativity.
There is another reason aliens are basically humanoid. In the movies, actors had to be able to wear the costumes. In Robot Monster, the second worst movie ever made, they couldn't afford an alien costume, but the director happened to have a gorilla suit and a diving bell helmet in his garage.
Yeah. This is the first one.
Human, not a Roman.
In Plan 9 from Outer Space, the worst movie ever made, the alien beings looked suspiciously like bad actors.
This is the second one.
Your space commander has returned from Earth.
In Queen of Outer Space, the alien looked suspiciously like a bad actress.
We're the only men on the whole planet?
Yes.
Poor Zsa Zsa looking for love in all the wrong places.
All righty. Those last 3 films were made by Ed Woods, our very famous bad director. And, of course, the Ed Woods estate did not like that at all. They sued, and the court had no problem finding that the use of these clips were a comment on society, on how films are made. So they were had no problem handing a defeat to the Ed Woods estate. So then the third category of film, which is is when you capture something else in the context of making a documentary. And I shied away from showing you a clip about background music because boring, that happens all the time, and our courts have now, not even 6 years ago, but today, no problem saying, hey, that's okay. They didn't mean to get the background music, and they're merely making this other story. So this was a little trickier, but it's the same thing here. This is a documentary about a particular very famous restaurant. It's a hamburger place called Big Boys, and they now have a whole chain. This is the founder's son, and he's sitting in front of a painting that is hangs in the original store. And the guy who made the painting brought the lawsuit. And one of his arguments was you could have sat this guy anywhere in the restaurant to take his interview, and you sat him right in front of my painting, so you owe me some money. Let's look at it.
We now return to Highway Hangouts, Eat and Run. None was more popular than Bob's Big Boy, which took over-the-top architecture and added oversized food. Bob's was the original home of the double-decker hamburger.
Angular design of a restaurant, big signs, neon lights that you could see at night from miles away if you were driving in a car. It was something that stood out. It wasn't a box. It stood out and made you think and made you realize, hey, this is a place where I can get something to eat, and it's probably open all night.
We now return to Highway Hangouts, Eat and Run. None was more popular than Bob's Big Boy, which took over-the-top architecture and added oversized food.
So you saw the painting he was sitting in front of, and actually he was sitting in front of that painting for a long time. Some of you saw more, sometimes less, but the artist sued. I'm just curious, here in Germany, just to show of hands, how many people think that would be okay in Germany? No, it's not too, okay. How many people think it would not be okay? Oh, about a split. America, they had no problem. They said, yeah, they could have sat him anywhere, but that wasn't what this movie's about. It's about this interview, and it's just in the background, so it's okay. Now, these are all documentaries, and those are the 4 situations. We'll have more tomorrow. We're shoving right up against the lunch hour, which I am always very careful not to run over when I speak right before lunch. So in the couple minutes we have left, I want to bring us full circle. I don't want to leave you with the impression that everything is okay in America. Lord knows it's not. But going full circle, we talked about Fred Weissman is a young man making this wonderful film called Titicut Follies. A client of ours last year made a film that was in Sundance called Countdown to Zero. And Countdown to Zero is a film that argues we ought to have 0 nuclear weapons in the world, including the United States. What a concept. They made this film, and they wanted to show how automatic it is once an order is given to fire missiles at Russia, and we still have missiles aimed at Russia, by the way, how automatic it is once this signal hits this buried office way down under the earth where there's 2 sergeants sitting there, 2 enlisted people. Once they get the order, it takes about a minute, and they just turn some dials and do some things, and poof, off go the rockets, and you've got World War III on your hands. This this is not footage that they were allowed to go shoot themselves. Needless to say, the people that run those nuclear weapon sites don't like films that argue there shouldn't be any nuclear weapon sites. So they weren't able to get in and shoot this footage themselves. There was one place in the world where there was footage of these people doing what they did. And it was a training film made by Fred Weissman. So they call Fred. Good old Fred. You know, he understands these kind of things. And he says, no, no, no. I shot that for the Department of Defense. I told them it would only be used in their training film. I can't let you use it. I said, okay. They came to me. We used it pursuant to fair use. And we got insurance, which we'll talk about, which is a big breakthrough that came. Today in America, you can get insurance that says if you get sued for these things, we'll cover you. So we had our insurance. It got in Sundance. Fred Weissman wasn't happy. He calls all the people at Sundance and they say, yes, Mr. Weissman, we love you, we respect you, but we did accept the film, and you know they got Michael Donaldson as their lawyer, and we're very close with Sundance, and you know they got insurance, so we're going to go ahead and show it, which he was very unhappy about. And we got distribution for the film. Again, he's unhappy. The distributor said, no, no, we've got it covered. And the next festival up, oh, I wish it had been Berlinale. The next festival up was Cannes. And lo and behold, they're in Cannes, and Fred Weissman's last film is in Cannes. So now he calls up and he complains and shouts, and he said, what's more, if you show that film, I'm pulling my film. And he knows a lot of people on the board, and he makes all these phone calls. And finally, Cannes Film Festival said, look, if we show this film, you have to take that footage out. So the footage was taken out. And the ripple effect of that is the DVD distributor said, well, I heard about all that stuff that happened at Cannes. I want you to take the footage out for the DVD version also. So there's still the privatization of censorship is what I call it, private censorship. So let's look at this latest. Oh, you nod. You got that one by nodding. What do? I push space? Okay.
I was one of the guys responsible for getting these missiles off the ground in 1 minute. We didn't call them Minuteman missiles for nothing. When I was serving in the Air Force as a launch officer, there was a device in the Launch Control Center into which 12 digits had to be dialed in order to unlock the missiles for firing. This had been installed under Robert McNamara over the objections of the Strategic Air Command. Since they couldn't prevent the panel from being installed, the Strategic Air Command in Omaha had set these codes to 0, and we all knew it. That was the secret unlock code for firing our missiles. 12 zeros. In fact, in our launch checklist, we had to ensure that the unlock code was set to all zeros before we completed the launch sequence. This changed in 1977 when they started using actual codes. But until then, I and one other crew member could have actually formatted a launch order, a completely valid launch order, and transmitted it to the entire American strategic arsenal.
It looks like we're in a shooting war.
Oh, hell. All the Russians above, sir?
Hendrik, that's all I've been told. I just came in on the red phone. My orders are for this base to be sealed tight, and that's what I mean to do, seal it tight. Now, I want you to transmit Plan R for Robert, to the wing. Plan R for Robert.
Is it that bad, sir?
It looks like it's pretty hairy.
Yes, sir.
I remember watching Dr. Strangelove and thinking they had it all wrong. You don't need to be a general. We were only lieutenants, but we could have started World War III just as easily as General Jack Ripper. We could have triggered implementation of the U.S. nuclear war plan involving thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons fired at the Soviet Union in China.
Stand by. Message follows.
This is the footage.
Tango, Golf, Lima.
The life of a launch officer is really kind of Pavlovian. You have been trained and conditioned so thoroughly, you kind of march lockstep into a very well-rehearsed script that's driven by checklists.
Step 1, launch keys inserted. Roger.
We would jump up, unlock our safe.
His voice continues to describe what's going on. I think we could all imagine what he's saying. But this is the footage that Fred Weissman shot for the Department of Defense. I think we got the idea. So. This is the, you call it the American way, you know, we're very happy of our capitalist system, but it's capitalism and censorship because Mr. Weissman was able to stop that film from being shown at Cannes, and it affected the DVD distribution in a way that was outside of any judicial system. One thing you've heard me mention was about insurance. I'll talk more about it tomorrow. I'm sensitive about the lunch. I would want to say one thing about something that Peter's going to talk about more tomorrow morning, and that is how we got where we are today in the States in terms of what can be used, not only in documentaries but in feature films, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. And that is that filmmakers 6 years ago in small groups, smaller than this room, probably all together, all 6 meetings in the United States involved just about this number of people all across the country that got together and said, here's what we think our rights are. And then we lawyers, it was myself, Professor Yassi from American University, and a couple other professors, put it in legal terms. And when you see, it begins with what the filmmakers actually thought, and then at the bottom of each one, there's limitations, and that's the lawyers. But there are limitations on these rights, and we felt in order to keep people from getting in trouble, we wanted to spell that all out in the same document. But it was filmmakers that created this change that is an absolute sea change in how documentaries are made today, and there are many, many, many documentaries that have been made that could not have otherwise been made, except for the statement of best practices and also the insurance that followed it. So I would urge you, I call it living in the prison of the mind. Peter, tomorrow morning, his talk is scissors in the head. And that's what you want to be careful of, and that's what you want to think about, how you can take control of these problems that everyone's talking about. There are solutions, and the solutions are in your hands, not in anybody else's. Okay, let's eat.